In 2021, the FSOL machine stepped up another gear with an enormous amount of releases, including new music from multiple projects and the start of yet another series of albums. But this week we'll be looking at the main FSOL releases of 2021 on Earthbeat Vision's A History of the Future Sound of London. FSOLDigital presents 2021 calendar album. Release date 30th of January to 30th of December 2021. 2021 began with no news on a calendar album, suggesting the project may have run its course. And then the cover was given to me to share on the FSOL board on 20th of January with a coming soon message. 10 days later it finally arrived, leaving it pretty late to get the first track in. As ever, tracks arrived throughout the year, usually within a few days of the end of the month, except September's, which arrived on October the 1st. Tut. Almost all of the material is comparatively new, with a couple of late noughties pieces, a 90s track rebuilt in 2018, and one possible archive piece being the only tracks not recorded within a year or so of release, making it feel more like a diary coming out of 9LW than the previous calendars. The music covers the usual range of styles, with plenty of the now common minimal IDM pieces, some more breaksy tracks, a couple of guitar-led ambient pieces, and various sounds in between. Features the usual suspects, Humanoid and Yage, the former providing a track from the scrapped Shh soundtrack, as well as introducing a new project, Forest Trails. This was the year I stopped listening to the tracks individually. After grabbing the first 4 or 5 on release, I left the rest to the end of the year so I could approach it as an individual album. Not being a particular fan of listening to individual tracks in general, this suited me pretty well, especially given my difficulty with the previous year's album. This was around the time a lengthy discussion appeared on the FSOL board, which was an exciting thing in itself at this point, about whether the large number of unconventional releases at this point was watering down the quality of FSOL's music, and it felt like a sensible time to reapproach the format. Kind of misses the point of the calendar format perhaps, but what's one to do? Listening in December, I actually really enjoyed the album, despite 2 or 3 tracks that didn't quite work for me. There's a lot to be said for listening to albums as albums. If not quite as strong as the first 3 volumes, it does feel like a real improvement on the 2020 record, and it restored my hope in the series. The original FSOLDigital cover in brown, with very old looking computer text and a typically FSOLDigital retro aesthetic, was replaced by a very different cover with the album's appearance on Bandcamp in early 2022. The Bandcamp cover features a writhing bundle of what looked like pipes, or perhaps something was come up and sliced Spiky up, leaving a mass of his tentacles floating underwater. While it does include the old splatter, water damage style filter of the top, the visual style in general is incredibly striking and looks really different to older art. With Buggy seemingly long out of the picture at this point, his style shouldn't be expected. There's something incredibly fresh and different about this cover that feels like it's signifying a new era for the band. The Bandcamp edition typically changes some of the naming around, with the Forest Trails track reassigned to FSOL and the Shh track name shortened. The original cover features the catalogue number FSOLD115.cat0081. I can't help feeling that's just a bunch of random numbers. The Future Sound of London, Idulco Bridge. Hey people, hope you're doing good. January kicks off with a track that has been rebuilt in 2018. The original extends back to the 90s. Remixed and some additional sounds and sequences added. Future Sound of London, Idulco Bridge. One of a very small number of older pieces on the 2021 calendar, Idulco Bridge certainly has a touch of the band's 90s sound in its use of chunky breakbeats. The modern sounds are likely in the synths, which just have that soft pad sound found on so many recent tracks. There are several cuts into sections with different beats and various synth sounds used throughout, making an enjoyably varied piece despite its shortish runtime. Future Sound London, Snug. Hi FSOL calendar subscribers, here's the track for February. This month's calendar track comes from August 2020, FSOL Snug. Another sign of the band's early years coming back around again, this mellow techno piece with 4 to the floor beats and big, bright FM synth melodies could easily be an archive piece without the more complex drum programming. Despite being clearly a minor key track, the big melodies give it a much more upbeat feel than much of the darker material being released at this point in the group's career. An excellent track. The future sound of London, Zen Jenny. Alright peeps, the future sound of London, Zen Jenny, created in January 21, fresh off the printing press. Enjoy. Maybe the most surprising piece on the 2021 calendar, maybe the most surprising piece on any of the calendars, Zen Jenny finds FSOL moving into stylistically new territory with a bonkers hyper-speed IDM piece. Chopped up breaks and intricate programming, gloopy synths, tempo and time signature changes, and totally unexpected violin-led outro make this a constantly surprising track. Bearing more than a little influence from recent humanoid material, nevertheless feels quite like any other piece in FSOL history. This has got to run to something like 180 BPM as well. Humanoid Animated Tree, also known as Animated Trees. Hi calendar subscribers, here is the next calendar track. This month it's Humanoid with Animated Tree from April 2020. Enjoy. After a run of more expansive pieces, the 2021 calendar moves into the more minimal percussive sound of the previous years on this Humanoid track. Gradually morphing and changing mid-tempo drum programming leads the piece, with the only overtly harmonic element being a fairly tense sounding drone that runs throughout in the background. Future Sound of London, Fledgling Sun. Greetings calendar subscribers, here is the calendar track for May. This month it's FSOL with Fledgling Sun. At this point it's been a while since we had one of these mellow acoustic guitar oriented FSOL tracks, and so Fledgling Sun is a wonderful change of pace. With a vocal sample similar to the one used in an artificial placement of emotion, it's probably a comparatively new recording, albeit one that's quite different to most released material from the previous few years. With mellow pads, gentle beats, and guitar and vocal samples and a gradually evolving structure, it's a wonderfully chilled track, and should a second Music for Calendars compilation ever come along, a must-have for inclusion. Forest Trails, Mockguxtluck, also known as the future sound of London, Mockguxtluck. Hey up, this month's calendar track is Mockguxtluck, taken from the forthcoming Forest Trails album. Enjoy. Been a while since we had a new alias, so why not introduce Forest Trails via 2021's calendar release? There's no other information about the project, and why it's considered a separate piece from FSOL. The track even ended up on the Bandcamp release reassigned to FSOL, suggesting that there's at least some crossover, and suggesting that Forest Trails might actually have ended already? I don't know. It's a difficult track to properly describe. It was maligned by one FSOL board member as just a couple of loops with some sounds on top for 4 minutes, which is actually a reasonably good description. Although I completely disagree with the poster's attitude towards the piece, it's definitely very repetitive, but in a way that creates a brilliantly hypnotic and utterly sinister manner. An oddly muffled bass line, some Waterphone-esque synths, and a beat that never quite reaches a comfortable groove is the soundtrack to something unstoppable chasing you, only ever seen out the corner of your eye. wonderfully odd track with some very odd artwork. I hope the Forest Trails project returns, especially if the album's anything like this. Humanoid, shh, diff, -10, also known as shh. Alrighty, this month, to celebrate the release of Humanoid's 7 songs on Detuned, we have a special track which was written for the defunct movie Shh, recorded at 9L West Studios, engineered by Yage. So yeah, Shh was a film that FSOL had been asked to soundtrack. This was in the mid to late noughties. The idea was it was a psychological horror film in which people were forced to stay quiet, which is something that's led into a much more successful sci-fi film in recent years. And FSOL were being brought on board not only to soundtrack the film, but also provide a film remix, which was vaguely defined as something involving remixing the entire sound, dialogue, foley and everything of the movie, which, let's be honest, would have been fucking brilliant. It was a real shame that didn't happen, but unfortunately the film got stuck in development hell and nothing's been heard of it in 17 or 18 years now, unsurprisingly. With the only other released track from that scrap soundtrack being The Equivalents, this track's simple existence is enough to give it curio value alone. It's actually a pretty strange piece with a repetitive, tinny beat and some atonal synth blasts over the top. Fairly repetitive, although in a way that would no doubt work in the right part of the film. The second half features vocoded vocals and some sinister synth sounds, before closing on what sounds like some Eastern classical music. On Bandcamp it was renamed Shh. Perhaps the most interesting thing about this is that it's released as Humanoid, Brian's recently revived solo IDM and acid project, but it would have been recorded in the 2000s. Yage, The Falling of the Crow. Here is the calendar track for August. This month's calendar track is from Yage and a Woodlands of Old outtake recorded in 2008. While the reverse guitars and overall tone of the track are certainly very Woodlands of Old, the thinner sounding drums and layers of growling analogue synths are somewhat at odds with the album's textures, and it's unsurprising the piece wasn't released at the time. It's an intriguing track though, and an enjoyable curio to hear. Future Sound of London, End of the City. Alright peoples, so apologies this is a little late. Is it still September somewhere? But here is the calendar track for September. This last month's track comes from FSOL and is entitled End of the City. Ah yes, the track that arrived in the wrong month. I'm always happy to hear the band try new things and head in new directions, but sometimes it's really enjoyable to hear something that harks back to their earlier days. The choir synth pads and bongo loop in this track hark back to 92 or 93 in sound, meaning it's almost certainly either an archived or enhanced archive piece, and a welcome change in pace for the 2021 album. A wonderfully atmospheric track. Future Sound of London, I Know. Hiya subscribers, this month's calendar track comes from 2020, recorded at 9L West, engineered by Yage. Back into sparse minimal territory for this new FSOL track with deep bass and layers of background atmospherics over a simple clicking beat. Despite its repetitive rhythm, the various abstract sounds make it comparable to some of the darker moments of the band's mid-90s recordings. Future Sound of London, close bracket, open bracket, S greater than T greater than R greater than I greater than N greater than G. This is an outtake from Music for 3 Books, Book 3, mixed and overdubbed at 9L West and engineered by Yage. Caret Omega 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 Sigma. Enjoy! Effectively confirming that the Ramblings Books bonus EPs are especially written. Close bracket, open bracket, S greater than T greater than R greater than I greater than N greater than G, or string as we call it in English, is the longest calendar track to date, running to nearly 8 minutes. The opening suggests this might be another clicky minimal piece, but then slow breakbeats come in, brooding synth pads and FM synth melodies take over. The filters and delays the drums go through in the middle are reminiscent of the band's 90s sound, and the lengthy runtime is earned with a very well developed structure, shifting from one section to another throughout the piece. A very strong track and a definite contender for a possible second Music from Calendars album. In other news, Caret Omega 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 Sigma. Future Sound of London, another ending. Merry Christmas all, here is the final track for 2021, the Future Sound of London, another ending. Thank you to everyone for supporting FSOLDigital, we look forward to seeing you all next year. If there are any tracks you've missed from this year, you should be able to download all 12 in a zip folder here. Happy New Year, Yage. What a way to end the album. Another ending is a gloriously warm track, quite at odds with the contemporary FSOL sound, with a lo-fi breakbeat joining the drum machine. The synth pads are accompanied by Hawaiian guitar tones, a sound previously unheard in the band's catalogue. It all combines to create a bouncy, somewhat uplifting but slightly bittersweet piece, an excellent album closer and a wonderful new direction to hear FSOL heading in. More like this please. And a brief moment to consider the embedded track art, which is also totally different for the band. Future Sound of London, Music for 3 Books. Release date 5th of February 2021, download 26th of April 2021, CD. In a vaguely similar but much more comprehensive manner as 2015's Life in Moments, Music for 3 Books brings together digital bonus tracks and gives them a proper, more definitive home and a physical release. The 17 tracks here, all previously released, with 1 to 5 appearing on Ramblings of a Madman Volume 1, 6 to 11 on Volume 2 and 12 to 17 on Volume 3. All 3 EPs were very well received by fans, but due to their short run times and existence as download-only bonuses, were somewhat overlooked and may be considered a little slight. So here they're given a new home and a chance to really shine, effectively creating a new album in the process. They were never intended to be released like this, but Brian was just experimenting one day, put them all together and realised they created a very cohesive whole. The music remains generally unchanged from the original releases, with added crossfades between the EPs themselves being the only differences. The gap between the Whispering Masses and Orrery is still inexplicably present. Track for track, as an album it's comfortably as strong as most of the Environment series, with a lot of fantastic pieces. Structurally it's maybe slightly weaker, what with it not being originally paced as an album, thus there's less obvious ebb and flow dynamic, no climactic pieces like many of the Environments contain. Episode almost derailing the flow with 6 minutes of Environments in the first third of the record, and Disseminate not really working as an album closer. But these are only minor niggles really, and as much down to my own particular ideas of what an album, especially an FSOL album, should be. To be honest, as a compilation of 3 bonus EPs it should be a lot weaker, and had it been Environment 7 I doubt anybody would have said it doesn't feel like a proper album. The only particularly noticeable difference from the Environments is that this features 3 Fuse tracks, although even then it's not the first to include several Pemberton piano collaborations. Stylistically it runs the whole gamut of late 2010s FSOL styles, from intense dark IDM to jazz-tinged breaks, ambient sound collage and modern classical. Take Umbrage is likely the only piece containing any 90s sounds. Perhaps because of the way it was released and thus not having the opportunity to sit and digest it in one go for my first listen, I struggled at first to really find any kind of overriding atmosphere in a record, but over time I've noticed it really seems to create an image of the British countryside for me, on the darker, wetter end of things, with murky woods and damp fields, odd undiscovered corners and horizons only glimpsed through a haze of mist and drizzle. No credits are given for the artwork at all, with the only credit being Art Sound Technology EBV. The front cover is an Alan Dougans photograph. In his words, "It's in the Pinjar Forestry Commission land outside Perth where my son Craig used to go off-road motorbiking. It's plantation forest, hence the near-perfect symmetry. There was an alternate version whereby I'd stretched out the tops of the pines that look quite ethereal. The image certainly matches the atmosphere I get from the music. Previously appeared in smaller form on the Cascade 2020 cover and labels. While the digital cover features the Life in Moments rendering of the band name, the CD edition reverts to the iconic, bold, all caps Euro style extended, for the first time since 2016 in terms of it being all caps. The booklet contains 6 pages of images taken from the Ramblings of a Madman books, with a couple of band photographs, shots of Earthbeat and photography by Buggy, Alan and the band, some overlaid in the usual FSOL collage style. The back of the booklet features a page-filling Electronic Brain Violence logo. The CD renders the name in Euro-style extended, if only the cover did, and features a couple of new polygon graphics as well as the full Herd Killing logo. Under the disc is a new wireframe image and the EBV logo. The tracklist on the back cover features each title in its own bubble, recalling the Lifeforms and Tales of Everdrina sleeve. The run of logos is cut to 4, with the Curves emblem missing. And hooray, the spine continues to match the bulk of FSOL CDs released since 2016. The album was released on Bandcamp in February 2021, with the CD edition available as a pre-order due to ship on the 15th of March. The combination of COVID-19 and Brexit adding delays to manufacturing and distribution, however, copies didn't start shipping until late April, admittedly still well ahead of the 14th of May general release. It's yet to be sold through the FSOLDigital site, marking the point where Bandcamp very clearly became the band's main home going forward. In some ways, it works as a nice stopgap before the seemingly always on the horizon Environment 7, with no traditionally structured album being released for some years at this point in the group's timeline, and it certainly comes highly recommended. FSOLDigital presents Music from Calendars 2017 to 2020. Release date 14th of May 2020, CD and download, 23rd July 2020, LP. At the start of 2021, Brian dropped me a casual message asking what I would say the best tracks of the 4 calendar album releases were. I responded with Frozen Air, Artificial Placement of Emotion and Surrounding the Garden as a Fog. There's absolutely no question. He then asked me to continue, prompting me to create a tracklist for a hypothetical best-of album. I had a long think about it and sent over a list of 14 tracks, with a comment that it was actually quite a difficult task, but the first 3 that I mentioned were absolute definites. I didn't think any more about it, just assuming it was Brian after some feedback and possibly gauging fan response to new material. The compilation called Music for Calendars appeared for pre-order on the band's Bandcamp page. I asked what the tracklist was and his reply was pretty much the same as what you sent me. It's a weird situation discovering you've curated an album without even knowing it. Actually, only around half my suggested tracks made it to the final cut. Considered for a single LP release, 14 track selection wouldn't have been possible, and a few band favourites were added. Riverbed and Propagate appear once again, despite them also being on Archive 9. My recommendation included a couple of the brighter, more melodic pieces, 303H5F, Petroleum and The New Normal, as well as the jazzy, rainy 3rd Street, which leads to a tracklist slightly more focused on the newly recorded, dark IDM sounding material than I would have gone with. On the whole, it feels like the final pass was created to emphasise the newly recorded tracks, which makes a lot more sense. Although there are many of us who will snap up every release FSOLDigital puts out, there's also a lot who are unaware of the digital-only releases, such as the calendars, as well as those who only collect physical releases, and those who only collect the main releases, and this compilation is clearly aimed at such listeners. And so it seems sensible to present a selection of new recordings in this context, as it will effectively be, for these people, a new album. Although the official blurb states the album brings them together in a seamlessly mixed 50-minute journey, there are a couple of gaps, both either side of commensalism. The latter makes more sense with it being at the end of the LP's first side, but I'm not sure why Blacked Out Window ends in silence. There's little in the way of new environments, other than a few field recordings and random sounds between the tracks, and Near Field closes with an environment first heard on Destination. 2017 and 2019's albums are represented by 3 tracks apiece, 18's by 4, and 20's a mere 1. Extremely difficult to judge Music for Calendars as a standalone album because I'd heard every track many times in a very different context before hearing it, and thus it feels really like a compilation. I'd say it's a more satisfying listen than the individual calendar album releases with the linking environments and Siegs, although of course they were added to the first 4 albums when they included on Bandcamp, although not as strong as the 2019 album overall. It's also hard to judge given my own input into the record's creation. It's certainly a very strong set of tracks, although I'm not sure if it really has its own sound world, but that's much more for people who discovered these tracks here to say though. One thing I can say is it's one of the darkest works in the band's catalogue. The cover changed between the pre-order edition and the final release, with the image stretched, the 5 logos moved, and 2017 to 2020 added to the text. Speaking of the text, it's hard to say what the artist and title is there, with FSOLDigital seeming the most important aspect, and the spine not including a band name at all. The image is the photograph from the near field ID tag minus the added textures. Photos are returned to the water damage style textured imagery again. While the spine does match the design of the previous few releases, it only states music for calendars, suggesting that it is a various artists compilation, and technically that is, especially with Propagate being reverted to a humanoid track once again. The CD booklet contains a selection of embedded images from various calendar tracks, although interestingly not just the ones from the album. Page 2 is Oceans of Plastic, 3 is Obscured by Dark Intervals, 4 Retracing, 5 Commensalism, 6 is 303 HF5, 7 Glockenspiel Snare Kitchen Tray, the credits page is Sol 7 Mix 107, and the disc Artificial Placement of Emotion. The labels on the vinyl edition show details of the cover image with the Electronic Brain Violence logo on side A and the 5 logos on side B. The credits differ slightly between the back cover and the CD booklet. My contribution to the album's curation is listed as data input on the CD, using my dead name at the time, but I'm not mentioned anywhere on the LP edition. I'm not really complaining though. Can't say I ever expected to be credited on an FSOL album at all. The band name is truncated to Future Sound of London without a "the" on the back cover, and Riverbed and Blanked Out Window receive random pluralisation. It wouldn't be an FSOL album without it. Frozen Air lacks the shortened mix name from its original release. With the appearance of older photos in the booklet, Boogie gets his first artwork credit in a few years. The album received a protracted and slightly confusing rollout. The initial announcement was made via the release of the 4 calendar albums on the FSOL Bandcamp. Despite clearly stating that it was a selection of the best tracks on one LP, the availability to order it on the page for every calendar album led some to think it was 4 editions and purchase 4 copies. After refunds were sent out, a separate page was eventually added to Bandcamp on the general release date, offering the album as a digital download, LP and CD. With the vinyl manufacturing industry on the verge of meltdown by 2021, sadly, delays were inevitable, with messages sent out to Bandcamp subscribers and Facebook followers every few weeks apologising for the continued postponement of the release. Copies eventually began to ship from 23rd July, just in time for new tax laws to come in throughout the EU, making import duty payable on the release for Europeans who'd purchased via FSOLDigital. Sadly out of the band's hands, and a sign of the utter disarray of releasing vinyl in the UK under the combined chaos of COVID-19, Brexit and the loss of the Apollo Masters vinyl plant. The Future Sound of London We Have Explosive 2021, or just We Have Explosive. Release date 26th of May 2021 CD and download, 12th of June 2021 LP. With a re-recording pretty much guaranteed for 2021's record store day, there was some speculation about which it would be. Glass was once more suggested as the most likely. It's unlikely anybody really expected it to be We Have Explosive, given the amount of backlash the track received from Gaz in 2001, even despite its appearance as a daft coda to Amorphous gigs in the years since. It never seemed likely that it would be revisited. It seemed even less likely that it would be revisited in a format that would make it even heavier and more aggressive sounding than its original form, but that's exactly what happened. Despite a reveal of the release in April ahead of June's record store day, a miscommunication or error somewhere along the line resulted in the CD edition being made available in late May. This was apparently impossible to stop, and as such FSOLDigital and the group's Bandcamp put the CD and digital versions out on the same day, for the first time before the LP edition. As with previous years, these feature a couple of additional tracks. A pair of tracks were hoped for inclusion, the Amorphous live version and the 2-inch tape reels mix. The first, perhaps unsurprisingly, remains unreleased, but the latter is at least present 13 years after appearing on the FSOL MySpace and on the Electric Brainstorm 1, now under the name Detonation. It's a pretty good example of the sound of the whole album too, with the record basically not letting up for a whole hour. By far the least ambient sounding release ever attributed to FSOL, every track is either breaks or IDM based, with some particularly intense sounding pieces near the end. Exotype is probably the fastest piece in the band's catalogue. Remarkably, despite all this, it's also incredibly atmospheric throughout, retaining the nocturnal City Limits sound of the 1997 We Have Explosive single and the 96-97 tour. The CD and LP editions feature different covers, both inspired by the original singles' run rake, newspaper cut and paste text style, but with very different text and backgrounds. The CD version features the band name in the usual font, again in all caps, while the LP version uses the text collage style and abbreviates the name to FSOL. The CD booklet is unusually minimal at only 4 pages, containing little new art, a stained wall photo, the cover text and track list. The CD itself features the Life in Moments style band name, and under the disc is a shot of a scaly human body morphing into a bird's head as first seen in the Dead City's 192-page book. No artist is credited on the sleeve, although the new art is generally believed to be by Brian. The LP edition unusually doesn't feature a TOT catalogue number, while the CD does. The 2021 text is only present on the LP labels and digital versions, with title and tracks listed simply as We Have Explosive and Heard Killing elsewhere. The symbols are reduced to 3 on the back cover: Earthbeat, Heard Killing and Globules. As with most of the previous re-recordings, the album proved very popular with a lot of fans, especially those more inclined towards the band's more rhythmic tracks. As one of those who finds themselves a little overwhelmed at the amount of material coming out at this point in the band's history, I'm always still impressed with these re-recordings, and this is no exception. For me, it's up there with Cascade 2020 as a release that's completely respectful of the original, whilst refreshingly new, consistently excellent, and atmospherically coherent. We Have Explosive 2021. The 2021 re-recording of We Have Explosive opens with environments from Dead City's tracks, Heard Killing, Her Face Forms in Summertime and Everyone in the World Is Doing Something Without Me, as well as the track's own electronic voices. I wonder whether the slightly muted fan response to the very abrupt opening to My Kingdom Reimagined fed into all the subsequent re-recordings, started with new extended environment sections. Arrangement-wise, the track's a pretty faithful recreation of the original in its slightly shorter album mix. In terms of sound, it's a slightly looser sounding mix, maybe a touch more lo-fi with the ride cymbal quite unusual sounding and tinny, the overall sound being more trebly, maybe less tough. There are some subtle changes in the drums, which are in some places more complex, in other places more simplistic. The overall differences are likely to be perceived by bigger fans, but casual listeners will probably not notice it's not the original. The piece ends quite abruptly, without the reversed sounds of the original, simply cutting out to a brief field recording, as heard throughout the 1996 ISDN tour. Implosive. Implosive is an intriguing piece that ties together several previously existing tracks. In effect, an alternate take of We Have Explosive Part 4, itself a version of Heard Killing, it blends that track's moody synth pads with a break only heard on We Have Explosive Oil Dub, as well as the pounding drums and electric bass loop heard on Headhunter, which itself would then go on to be developed into Sendora Luminoso and The Shining Path as part of the very first Isness sessions. This final release in 2021 finally closes the circle, with We Have Explosive vocals and Run DMC samples also present, as well as occasional appearances of the track's buzzing synths and breaks. It's basically a darker, more atmospheric and more chaotic remix of the piece. Occasional wah-wah guitar adds a subtle hint of funk. It's pretty bonkers and very intense and utterly excellent. Vaporize. The first track on We Have Explosive 2021 to really sound like a modern FSOL piece, Vaporize is based around a skittering breakbeat and atmospheric synth pads. The beat always feels like it's second guessing and even tripping over itself, leading to a continually fascinating complex textural rhythm. The dark feel matches the nocturnal vibe of the 1997 single, while the only real reference to We Have Explosive is in a couple of samples that might come from the single or the era's accompanying tour, but are filtered enough to be difficult to discern. Detonation, also known as We Have Explosive 2-inch tape reels version. In May 2008, a major FSOLDigital update announced the impending release of an album called 2-inch tape reels, described as various sessions, demos and outtakes from the 2-inch multi-track recordings at RAM Studio. RAM would be Leon Mars' studio in the same block as Earthbeat, and the album was promoted with an unheard mix of We Have Explosive appearing on the band's MySpace. Another excerpt of this mix was included on the Electric Brainstorm 1 later in the year, and then nothing was heard again. Until the announcement of We Have Explosive in 2021, it was generally considered unlikely we'd ever hear anything from the album, despite Brian informing me a release was still planned one day. Once the re-recording was announced, however, there was immediate hope that this mix would be on it. Detonation, put simply, is absurd, in the best way possible. It opens with some very loose, live-sounding drums with a few elements of the original track playing over the top, and then all elements of the track are effectively chopped up in a blender and thrown together seemingly at random. It's rhythmically tight, but there's no obvious logic to where every sound appears. It has to be heard to be believed, really. Things cut back to the opening drum section, then back into madness again, and there's a brief ambient interlude before chaos once again ensues. At nearly 7 minutes, you'd think it was just way too much to really work, but I could honestly listen to an even longer mix. And this is coming from someone who generally prefers the band's more melodic ambient side. Guitar strings are scraped during the second half, but otherwise it's just the same wonderfully bonkers elements. The environment, heard at the end of Her Face Forms in Summertime and We Have Explosive Part 2, gets its own mangling at the end of the track. Herd Killing 2021. What we expected, a fairly straightforward re-recording of Herd Killing. What we got, a totally new, completely fucked up reworking of We Have Explosive Part 4. Okay, the latter is simply the former with additional pads and flutes, and that's no bad thing as this piece keeps with that wonderfully atmospheric nocturnal sound. Less than 2 minutes in, the drums start to head into weird, glitched, time-stretched territory, then additional percussion lines are added with new thumping electronic kicks, cowbells and other sounds. It's hard to know when these elements date from, as they can be heard on the 2009 live version. Live electric bass then joins in and even more mangled drums appear. The I'm Here sample from the 96 tour even appears. A wonderful track and a really welcome surprise. Stasis Field. After a run of intense tracks, Stasis Field slows We Have Explosive 2021 to a crawl with deep, dubby atmospherics, booming bass and echoes. Guitar and ghoul sounds from Black Hill Transmitter's Recovery make a surprising appearance in what I think is the first crossover between FSOL and Black Hill. Other than their Face Form in Summertime closing environment making a brief appearance at the start, there are no 1996 sounds discernible here, but the overall feel and atmosphere are thoroughly in keeping with the vibe of the rest of the album. Waiting Your Return. A slow electronic piece, opening with a drum loop and layers of atmospheric textures, before deep, reverberated bass and synth pads and arpeggios appear, bringing in a touch of the contemporary FSOL sound into the album for the first time. The track ends using Hall of Mirrors as an environment, tying in Environments 3 even further with the wider Dead City sound in the process. The We Have Explosive vocal appears over the closing environment. MIB 1.479, also known as MIB 1. After a couple of more sedate pieces, MIB 1.479, or MIB 1 as it's simply known in the download version, brings the tempo of We Have Explosive 2021 racing back up with a loud, fast, punchy IDM piece. Some sounds from the Dead Cities tour are utilised as atmospherics, and synth pads very similar to those from We Have Explosive Part 4 add melodic elements. Subtle appearances of the buzzing synth, titular vocals and reversed bells from We Have Explosive tie the piece in with the album's general theme, and what might even be the haunting guitar note from Part 5 makes a brief appearance. An excellent example of the album's seamless mix of intense rhythmic electronics and dense atmospherics. The first few seconds of Herd Killing even make an appearance. Exploding. Exploding starts with the album's first appearance of the rising reverse notes from the end of the original We Have Explosive, before heading into a drum and bass remix of the track, which seems to get crazier as it goes along. If I had to nominate any track on the album to be from 1996, it would probably be this. Exotype. Here it is, easily the fastest FSOL track to date. It begins with a long, tense opening environment with a high-pitched synth whine, as if waiting for something quite dramatic to happen. And then it does, with a mangled beat that rattles along at something like 190 BPM. The bass plays a deep, ominous half-time riff, and various noises and sounds of static from Dead Cities are triggered over the top. It's the kind of FSOL track nobody would ever have expected would ever be released following the dramatic change in attitude and sound at the start of the century. Slide Door. The first of We Have Explosive 2021 CD and download exclusives, Slide Door is a bit of a tonal shift from the rest of the album, a fairly stark, clicky IDM piece with wandering synth bass, lots of wobbly synth sounds, a vaguely hip-hop inspired beat, and an overall sound easily comparable to Autechre's 21st century material. It's the only track on the album with no obvious links to We Have Explosive at all. And just when you think they've done another gapless album, it fades away to silence, one track before the end. 5cam. Closing the CD and download editions of We Have Explosive 2021, 5cam returns to the Herd Killing and We Have Explosive Part 4 end of the spectrum, effectively a more stripped back ambient version of Herd Killing 2021 with some moody bass pads adding atmosphere. Just when it appears to have faded away, the silence is broken with a run of effects, traffic going by, some odd mangled digital sounds, and finally a bleep. An odd way to end, but strangely effective, as if the album has run its course and simply disintegrated. And on that note, we reached the end of this week's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the music here, some fantastic releases here. So drop me a comment down below or press one of those buttons. All interaction really helps my channel. I will be back next week looking at 2021's run of humanoid releases and transmissions, so I hope you'll join me for that. Hiya FSOL Hey up, this month's calendar track is Mock Gux. I can't believe I keep saying that. Oh, fucking hell, Mock Gux. Although then it's not the first to include several Although even then it's not the first to include several piano... Fuck.